In this explainer, we're diving straight into a story that literally defies logic. We're talking about a moment that just stopped the entire world right in its tracks. We're going to see how, against absolutely unimaginable odds, a staggering collection of brilliant minds managed to look up at the night sky and actually conquer it. Yes, we are talking about Apollo 11. It's a story of raw courage, unparalleled engineering, and testing the absolute limits of what human beings can do. So how exactly did humanity pull off the truly impossible? Okay, let's dive into this. Picture the night of July 20th, 1969. Roughly 600 million people are gathered around their television sets, listening to radios or staring at public screens. Think about that number for a second. At the time, that was 1/5 of everyone alive on planet Earth. And they weren't tuning in for the Olympics or some global conflict. No, they were collectively holding their breath to watch just 11 grainy seconds of a man climbing down a ladder to step onto the surface of another world for the very first time. But, that magical, iconic moment didn't just appear out of nowhere. Those 11 seconds were actually the massive payoff of nearly a decade of grueling, relentless work. We are talking about billions of dollars spent, the dedicated labor of 500,000 people, and honestly, a terrifying chain of near disasters that could have ended in absolute tragedy at any given point. To really understand the magnitude of this achievement, we have to rewind to the very beginning.
Part 1. The Challenge.
Now, you might think this whole push for the stars began with some noble quest for scientific discovery. Well, actually, it started with Cold War fear. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik into orbit. It was the very first artificial satellite. It was merely the size of a beach ball, and literally all it did was emit a simple beep. But that little beep sent absolute shockwaves through Washington. The logic was terrifyingly clear. If the Soviets could put something in space, they could potentially drop a nuclear warhead anywhere on Earth. 4 years later, a young President John F. Kennedy knew the United States needed a bold, audacious response. They couldn't just catch up, they had to completely leap ahead. And that brings us to May 25, 1961. Kennedy stood before Congress and delivered words that absolutely stunned the world. He said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." With that single sentence, Kennedy established an impossible deadline. The ticking clock had officially started for the entire nation.
The sheer absurdity of this contrast is just staggering. At the exact moment Kennedy made that massive promise, do you know how much spaceflight experience the United States actually had? They had sent a single astronaut to space for just 15 minutes. That's it, 15 minutes. They had almost zero idea how to actually get to the moon. But what they did have was that immovable deadline at the end of the decade and virtually unlimited funding to figure the whole thing out.
Part 2. Building it. The greatest project in human history. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of what we're talking about. At the heart of this massive operation, involving over 400,000 people, was the Saturn V rocket. To this day, it remains the most capable launch vehicle ever flown. Just look at these specs. It stood 111 meters tall. That is taller than the Statue of Liberty. It generated a mind-boggling 35 million newtons of thrust at liftoff, which is roughly equivalent to the power of dozens of jumbo jets, all designed to throw a comparatively tiny lunar module all the way to the moon. And the most terrifying requirement of all, it had to work perfectly, every single time.
But of course, the path to perfection is often paved with profound heartbreak. In January 1967, a devastating fire broke out during a routine ground test in the Apollo 1 capsule. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were tragically killed in seconds. The entire program was immediately grounded. Investigations uncovered hundreds of design flaws, and NASA was forced to rebuild not just the hardware, but their entire culture of safety. As somber as it is, that tragedy sparked a top-to-bottom, life-saving safety redesign that likely saved the lives of every single astronaut who flew after them.
Part 3. The Mission. July 16, 1969.
Astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins are strapped in, sitting atop 2,800 tons of highly explosive rocket fuel. The sequence was meticulous. Step 1, a flawless liftoff. Step 2, entering lunar orbit 4 days later. Step 3, Armstrong and Aldrin transfer into the small, spindly craft nicknamed the Eagle and begin their descent to the surface. For the first few days, the flight was absolutely perfect. And then, everything started going terribly wrong. At 30,000 feet above the lunar surface, a yellow warning light suddenly flashes on the panel. A 12:02 program alarm. The ship's computer was completely overloaded. Mission Control had mere seconds to make a life-or-death decision. Do they abort the mission right now or continue the descent?
The fate of the entire mission rested on the shoulders of a 26-year-old guidance officer named Jack Garman. He had studied every possible code, knew the computer was just shedding less critical tasks to stay focused, and confidently told Houston, "Go."
But dodging a computer failure immediately led to a terrifying physical crisis. The Eagle's auto-targeting system was flying them straight into a massive boulder field. We're talking boulders the size of cars, spread across an area the size of a football stadium. Landing there meant certain death, so Armstrong had absolutely no choice. He seized manual control of the spacecraft, effectively flying it like a helicopter, desperately scanning out the window for flat, safe ground. And he had to do it fast. He was flying low, skimming right over craters, and the fuel gauge was absolutely plummeting. Mission Control called out that they had less than 60 seconds of fuel remaining before the engine would cut out, and they would literally just drop out of the sky.
The suspense in Houston was suffocating. You could hear a pen drop. The fuel ticked down further. Finally, with roughly 20 seconds of fuel to spare, just 20 seconds away from a mandatory abort or a fatal crash, a blue contact light flashed on the panel. Aldrin spoke first, simply saying, "Contact light."
And then Armstrong keyed his mic and delivered the words that history will never, ever forget. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Take a moment to just let that sink in. Down in Mission Control, grown men, hardened engineers who had worked nonstop, day and night for a decade, openly wept. They had actually made it.
Part 4. One Small Step. The Edge of History.
6 hours after touching down, after running through exhaustive checklists, forcing down a meal, and finally suiting up, Neil Armstrong opened the hatch. He slowly climbed down the 9 rungs of the ladder and stood at the very edge of history. To the 600 million people listening back on Earth, he delivered this truly iconic line. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Interestingly enough, there's been a historical debate about this ever since. Armstrong actually intended to say one small step for a man, but that little was either lost in the static of the radio transmission or simply lost in the overwhelming emotion of the moment.
Buzz Aldrin followed him down the ladder just a few minutes later. As he stepped off the footpad, he looked out at a stark, gray, completely silent landscape that no human eye had ever seen before. And he summed it all up with a brilliantly poetic 3-word description: magnificent desolation.
So the crucial point is, while they were on the surface, they didn't just plant a flag and take pictures. They meticulously documented and gathered samples from various rock collection sites. They even received a surreal, extreme long-distance phone call from President Nixon. And right before they left, they mounted a plaque on the descent stage of the lunar module, the part that remained behind. It read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind."
Apollo 11 returned safely to Earth on July 24th, and by December 1972, a total of 12 humans had walked on the lunar surface. But here is something truly breathtaking to consider: lunar preservation. Because the moon has absolutely no wind, no weather, and zero erosion, the marks they left are literally frozen in time. The boot prints of those 12 astronauts, sitting in dust and silence 384,000 kilometers away, will remain exactly as they are for millions of years. Long after everyone watching this explainer is gone, those footprints will still be right there.
The moon landing wasn't just a science experiment. It was the ultimate, undeniable proof of what humanity is truly capable of when we decide, together, that a hard, impossible thing simply must be done. So I'll leave you with this question to ponder today. If those footprints will last for millions of years as a silent testament to our resolve, what impossible thing will humanity decide to do next? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you found this journey as remarkable as I do, make sure to hit subscribe so we can keep bringing you the structured, fascinating moments in history that changed absolutely everything. See you next time.